Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. This is the second edition that I have for you today, and there's going to be a bunch because there's a pile of articles that I need to go through here and get the news out to you. But in this episode, we have 5 articles, and the first one is off of sonsoflibertymedia.com, and it says, New illegal protections put in place for Planned Parenthood by Obama. With an editor's note, and it says the reason these rules are illegal is that the executive branch has no authority to make law. That branch is to simply enforce legislation that Congress writes according to the enumerated power they are granted. And then the article starts out, and it says, there has been much made over the videos uncovering Planned Parenthood barbarity, the casual way they spoke of baby parts like widgets from a factory. There have also been many attempts to separate state funding. All legislation has failed. Now states have been banned from the attempt. Do states have the right to refuse to work with abortion companies? The Christian News Report says the Obama administration finalized a rule on Wednesday that bans states from defunding family planning organizations such as Planned Parenthood because they abort unborn children. Strengthen the access to essential services like cancer screening and contraception for some of the most vulnerable parents or patients in this country. Officer Karen Scott of the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Health said in a statement, public comments showed overwhelmingly support for finalizing the rule, which clarifies that all organizations able to provide these services should be eligible to compete for funds. And then the article says the White House is dressing this up as needed protection for women's health care, but what this really comes down to is the federal protection of federal abortion funding. The Christian News continues in saying, reducing access to Title X services has many adverse effects. The Title X services have a dramatic effect on the number of unintended pregnancies and births in the United States. HHS said in September, for example, services provided by Title X funded sites helped prevent 1 million unintended pregnancies in 2010, which would have resulted in an estimated 1,000 planned births. Not all see it this way, though. But the article goes on and says, but the religious liberties group Alliance Defending Freedom, or ADF, decried the new regulation, remarking that there are plenty of organizations that offer the same services as Planned Parenthood, minus the child killing. It said that states should have the freedom to fund groups that they wish. Planned Parenthood isn't superior to true publicly funded healthcare centers, which are far more numerous, simply because it claims to focus on dispensing birth control. Despite being America's largest abortion business, said senior counsel Stephen Aden in a statement. The problem with this line of thinking is that the two services are not mutually exclusive. Some organizations and facilities offer medical care, testing, and birth control, but do not murder babies. And is this not what Obama is seeking to protect? You have that article. The next one that I have for you is off of Dennis Michael Lynch, and it says, Putin, U.S. not a threat. Democrats are sore losers. During his annual press conference, Russian President Vladimir Putin addressed the statements made by President-elect Trump regarding the U.S. nuclear arsenal and the Democratic opinion that Putin was involved in swaying the election for Trump. Referring to his comment that Russia's military was stronger than any potential aggressor, Putin clarified that he was referring to countries he believed would realistically launch an attack on Russia. Putin said that his statement was misunderstood and that he accepted the United States military was most powerful in the world. Nobody is arguing that, Putin said. I was a bit surprised by the statements from some representatives of the current U.S. administration who, for some reason, started to prove that the U.S. military was the most powerful in the world. Putin said, referring to the State Department's comments from Thursday. Putin said that he did not consider the United States a potential threat. After Putin's statement regarding his military strength, President-elect Trump tweeted, "Must greatly strengthen and expand its nuclear capability until such time as the world comes to its senses regarding nukes." Putin praised Trump's efforts for being in touch with the U.S. people and said that his tweet regarding the nuclear expansion was not anything remarkable. In the course of his election campaign, he spoke about the necessity of strengthening the U.S. nuclear arsenal and strengthening the armed forces. "There's nothing unusual here," Putin said. "If anyone is unleashing an armed race, it's not us. Spend resources on an arms race that we can't afford." Putin also went on to quickly claim that Democrats were sore losers, becoming rather animated while discussing the Democrats and the recent election. Putin said the current administration and the leadership of the Democratic Party are trying to blame all their failures on external factors. A party which has clearly forgotten the original meaning of its own name, they are losing on all fronts and looking elsewhere for the things to blame. In my view, this, how shall I say it, degrades their own dignity. You have to know how to lose with dignity. Putin slammed Democrats further by saying that they forgot the meaning of their own name. President Obama's administration and other U.S. intelligence officials have accused Russia of interfering with the U.S. election by hacking Democrat Party accounts. And information from those hacks was leaked online because political problems for Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton. Putin quickly dismissed all claims that his country had a hand in the election, stating it's not like that. All this, the accusations speak of the current administration's systematic problems. Democrats blamed Russia for their November loss as Putin spoke positively of Trump before his election win. Trump understood the mood of the people and kept going until the end, when nobody believed in him, Putin said, adding with a smile, "except for you and me." Putin told reporters that if Trump invited him, he would be willing to visit the United States. He also expressed that he believes that the U.S.-Russian relationship would return to normal. And they have a video in this of his full conference if you want to pull it up and take a look at that. The next article I have here is off of Natural News, and it says, Facebook rolls out plans to push GMOs by labeling anti-GMO stories fake news. Bound and determined to continue buying real news containing facts that it doesn't like, Facebook has announced its new partnership with ABC News and Snopes.com to filter out fake news from its coveted news feed. These fact checkers, however, have all bought into the biotech industry's bogus science that claims GMOs and glyphosate, how do you pronounce that? Glyphosate are completely safe for humans, animals, and the environment. As reported by Business Insider, the social media site says it will begin fact-checking, labeling, and then burying so-called fake news and hoaxes, after executives say the company was heavily criticized for its role in spreading a deluge of political misinformation during the recent U.S. presidential election. Facebook, in other words, plans to make official the censorship of non-conformist, truth-filled that it was caught doing in the months before the election. In an interview with Gizmodo, former Facebook news curators revealed that so-called conservative news and reporting was purposely suppressed in favor of far-left sites that were actually reporting fake news. Censorship is now official at Facebook. Depending on who was on shift, things would be blacklisted or trending, one of the former curators told the site. "I believe it had a chilling effect on conservative news. Censorship tends to do that, have a chilling effect on whatever angle a story is being suppressed. Now Facebook wants to make that a formal policy." According to Business Insider, this is how the new Facebook censorship program will work. The company has teamed up with a short list of media organizations that includes ABC News and Snopes, part of an international fact-checking network that is led by Pointer, a non-profit journalism school in St. Petersburg, Florida. Once third-party fact-checkers have determined that a story is fake, it will be labeled and then buried in the newsfeed. Officials told Business Insider that the social site will also use algorithms to determine whether a story that has been deemed to be phony is going viral. We focused our efforts on the worst of the worst, on the clear hoaxes spread by spammers for their own gain, and on engaging both our community and third-party organizations, Facebook newsfeed chief Adam Mosseri said in a company blog post. News organizations ourselves, we applaud efforts to root out phony news stories and fraudulent reporting. The problem here is that Facebook, led by a lockstep leftist in Mark Zuckerberg, isn't interested in making sure that only genuine news makes it to the valued feed list. He's interested in suppressing opinions and inconsistent facts, especially when they are being reported by news organizations that do not fall in line with the corporate or liberal narratives. We should start calling it fake book. So does this mean that Facebook will soon weed out and bury fake, discredited stories from the Washington Post claiming that Russia hacked the U.S. elections in order to sway voters away from Hillary Clinton to support Donald Trump? Or perhaps New York Times, which has reported that the U.S. spy agencies have consensus about this. That's fake, because the intelligence community has no consensus on this, and in fact, intel chiefs have distanced themselves from CIA claim that the hacking occurred. In fact, the NSA whistleblower says the Russian hacking narrative is bogus because hard evidence points to an inside leak instead. What about the nefarious claim by CNN that the Chinese recently took a U.S. undersea research drone because President-elect Trump took a congratulatory phone call from the president of Taiwan, a claim with no evidence whatsoever? Or how about stories that ABC News fakes and Snopes, which has clear left-wing bias, or stories promoting GMOs when, in fact, they are harmful and damaging to our food chain? There definitely is a cottage industry of clickbait phony news on the internet, no question about it. But the so-called mainstream media is most guilty of spreading false stories and political hack attacks disguised as news. And yet, those are the sources of news that Facebook will increasingly rely on in the coming months and years. Maybe we should begin calling the social media site Fakebook, because its newsfeed will be full of it. In the meantime, Truth Wiki lays bare the bias behind fact-checking here. So there's two links you can click on to get that information. And it says, if you want real social media experience featuring uncensored news and information, join ours. And there's a link there that you can click to join that one. There's some information for you from Natural News. The next one is on Live Science, and it says, UN will take on killer robots in 2017. Good news, fellow humans. The United Nations has decided to take on killer robots. At the International Convention on Conventional Weapons in Geneva, 123 participating nations, or 100, I guess it's 123 participating nations, voted to initiate official discussions on danger of lethal autonomous weapon systems. That's the emerging designation for so-called killer robots, artificial intelligence that can target and strike without human intervention. The agreement is the latest development in growing movement called for an ban on weaponizing artificial intelligence, otherwise known as AI, and deadly autonomous weapons. Last year, a coalition of more than 1,000 scientists and industry leaders, including Elon Musk and representatives of Google and Microsoft, signed an official letter to the United Nations demanding action. And they have some video in this if you care to pull that up and take a look at that. And the article goes on and says the UN decision is significant in that it calls for formal discussions on the issue in 2017. In high-level international deliberations, the move from informal to formal represents a real step forward, said Stephen Goose, Arms Director of Human Rights Watch and co-founder of the Campaign to Stop Killer Robots. They decided to move from the talk shop phase to the action phase, where they are expected to produce concrete outcome. an email exchange with Seeker. It's widely acknowledged that military, get it to, it's pages jumping around here. Okay, here we go. It's widely acknowledged, and it jumped again. I'll be dogged. Okay, that military agencies around the world are already developing lethal autonomous weapons. In August, Chinese officials disclosed that the country is exploring the use, well, for goodness sakes, wish it would quit that. Okay. Its use of artificial intelligence and automation in its next generation of cruise missiles. China's plans for weapons and artificial intelligence may be terrifying, but no more terrifying than similar efforts by the US, Russia, Israel, and others, Goose said. The US is further along in this field than any other nation. Most advanced militaries are pursuing ever greater autonomy in weapons. Killer robots would come in all sizes and shapes, including deadly miniaturized versions that could attack in huge swarms and would operate from the air, from the ground, and from the sea and underwater. The core issue in regard to these weapon systems concerns that human agency, Goose said. The key thing distinguishing a fully autonomous weapon from an ordinary conventional weapon or even semi-autonomous weapon like a drone is that a human would no longer be deciding what or whom the target and when to pull the trigger, he said. The weapon system itself, intelligence and sensors would make those critical battlefield determinations. This would change the very nature of warfare and not for the betterment of humankind. Goose said that pressure from the science industry leaders, including some rather apocalyptic warnings from Stephen Hawking, helped spur the UN into action. The scientific community appears quite unified in opposing the development of fully autonomous weapons, he said. They worry that pursuit of fully autonomous weapons will damage the reputation of AI community and will make it more difficult to move forward with the beneficial AI efforts. Aside from the obvious danger of killer robots gone rogue, of such systems could lead to a robotic arms race that threatens international stability, Goose said. Autonomous weapons are foreseeable, and we should take action now to prevent potentially catastrophic future harm to civilians, to soldiers, and to the planet. And the final article I have in this episode is off of freethoughtproject.com, and it says cop receives unprecedented life sentence for tasering handcuffed man to death. Try this again. East Point, Georgia. In an unprecedented win for police accountability, a former East Point police officer, was sentenced to life in prison for murder, while its partner, or that's what it says, and I think it should be his partner, was sentenced to 18 months for killing a man by excessively tasing him. According to the AJC, Fulton Superior Court Judge Henry Newkirk was obligated to sentence former East Point Police Department Sergeant Marcus Eberhardt to life after he was convicted Friday of murdering Gregory Towns in April of 2014. But the judge had latitude in deciding punishment for former Police Corporal Howard Weems, who was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, reckless conduct, and violation of an oath by a public officer. Once Weems finishes his sentence, according to the judge, he will be required to speak at least 10 other police departments to inform them about the dangers of repeatedly tasing individuals. However, because Weems was sentenced under Georgia First Officer Act, once he completes his sentence, he will no longer be a convicted felon. The short sentence and subsequent expunging of Weems' record have angered Towns' family, who says the weak punishment suggests his crime was not serious. Project previously reported in 2014, Weems and Eberhardt found Towns sitting down and out of breath after a short foot chase. He asked officers at least 10 times to be allowed to rest before going with them, however, they would not oblige. Instead of allowing him to rest, the cops then decided to use their weapons as cattle prod to force the weak man to walk. Towns decided after being tased 14 times in 29 minutes. Or try that again. Towns died after being tased 14 times in 29 minutes. 2 officers repeatedly shocked this man's body for a total of 47 seconds while unarmed and handcuffed. The autopsy ruled the death a homicide, as Towns died in a shallow creek where several of the shocks took place. Luckily, a passerby decided to pull out their phone and document the abuse with photograph used against the officers as evidence. Lawyers for the family exposed how police tried to cover up how many times they used their tasers. Only 6 taser shocks were logged on the police reports, despite which indicated that Sergeant Marcus Eberhardt fired his taser 10 times and Officer Howard Weems fired 4 times. According to Amnesty International, between 2001 and 2008, 351 people in the United States died from being shocked by police tasers. Electronic Village has documented another 212 taser-related deaths in the United States from 2009 to 2014. There have been at least 563 documented taser-related deaths in America since 2001. While we often ask, why didn't that cop use a taser instead of his gun? It's important to remember that while a person is less likely to die from a taser shock than a gunshot, they are still a weapon, and still often unnecessary and lethal. While this sentence is certainly a win for justice, there are multiple other cases of officers tasering people to death and getting off scot-free. On November 20th of 2015, sheriff deputies in Coweta County, Georgia, were summoned to help subdue a man having a psychotic breakdown. Instead of helping him, they tasered him to death. In October week, the Coweta District Attorney's Office announced their decision to not press charges against the officers responsible. The death of 32-year-old Chase Sherman was captured on video, yet neither of the cops was charged. On February 3rd, 2015, Natasha McKenna, age 37, was shocked 4 times with 50,000 volts while her hands were cuffed behind her back, her legs in shackles, and wearing a mesh mask. The multiple electronic shocks stopped her heart and her breathing. She was taken to Fairfax Hospital, however, it was too late. McKenna was declared brain dead and removed from life support several days later. None of the officers involved in McKenna's death were charged. On March 3rd of 2015, Ruth Temple called out Oklahoma police officers after her boyfriend started acting strangely. That 911 call would eventually lead to Temple's boyfriend, Daryl Gatewood's death. A clear, mentally distraught Gatewood was then dragged into the street and pepper sprayed and tasered. He would release, taser again, release, taser again, said witness Leanne Mize. It was very scary, out of line. They killed a husband, a father, a grandfather in front of the grandbabies, wife and daughter. None of the officers were charged in the death of Gatewood. Sadly, there are only a handful of many cases in which police shock people to death. The list goes on. And there is video in this if you want to take a look at that article. So that's all I have for you in this episode, but there'll be more. If you like what we're doing, give it a thumbs up, share it around so people get to hear the news. And if you haven't, subscribe. Be sure and click that little bell beside the subscribe button so that you can click the box and get emails on every time I put out a show. Going to be a mess of them today. See you in the next one.